Hello and welcome to the Raspberry Pi coding channel, a channel that focuses on the coding side of Raspberry Pis. In this video, we'll be looking at how to set up the fantastically capable and wonderfully named PiHole on your Raspberry Pi. A quick spoiler, I can tell you now, PiHole is a textbook example of why you should have and use a Raspberry Pi at home and fits this channel's objectives perfectly because it's free and it makes your life a lot easier whilst on the net. Let's get started then by talking in literally 1 minute about why you'd want to do this. But of course, before I get on to that, a quick mention of my Patreon account. Just a reminder that if you'd like to support me, get access to videos early when I do a series, or would like to access some of the scripts I write, please do check it out, it would be much appreciated. Okay, on to why we would do it. Well, PiHole is simply an installable piece of software which you can install on any Linux system, not just a Pi, and it runs in perpetuity, acting as an interface to the internet through which your internet traffic will pass before being available to your local network devices. Why would you want to have something that intercepts all internet traffic before it's available to your local network devices, I hear you ask? Well, it's kind of obvious, and I'm guessing if you've come to this site or come to this video, you're going to know why already, but let's have a quick look. Firstly, PiHole blocks ads on any device on your local network. There is no client-side software required. It is a router level, essentially a router level process. So no client-side software on each device is required. It actually improves local network performance because the ads are stripped out before they get to your local network. And of course, if you've been looking at PiHole before you looked at this video, you'll know that it comes with a great dashboard, not just for viewing kind of what it's doing and how many ads it's blocking and what it's blocking, but it also provides you with some admin controls that allow you to change what it's doing, allow you to update it, things like that, which makes its management nice and easy. Okay. So with all of that in mind, let me show you just how easy it is to set up PiHole on your Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to just close this down very unprofessionally. I'm just going to ad-lib this one a bit. And here we are on my desktop with my SSH terminal connected to my Raspberry Pi 4. So I'm assuming you can get to this stage. You can connect to your Raspberry Pi 4 and you've got a terminal open like I have right now. I won't go through the process of doing this. If you want to know how to do this, check out my Linux Essentials course, which will explain it to you. Check out my hosting courses, which also explain to you how to connect to your Raspberry Pi using things like SSH aliases, which are brilliant. Anyway, back to the point. So to use PiHole on your Raspberry Pi on your local network, clearly the first thing we need to do is install PiHole on the Raspberry Pi. In my case, my Pi 4. I should be clear on this, you don't need a Pi 4. You could do this on other types of Raspberry Pi, or in fact, you could do this on any Linux distribution that I know of, or you could even do it in a Docker container running Linux. But I'll be doing it on my Pi 4 directly. Also note that I run PiHole anyway, so the installation process will appear slightly different to how you see it, but only slightly different because I will reconfigure, and you'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, so firstly, let's install PiHole. This is done by using, well, first off, by downloading, the installer shell script. So I'm going to use wget, which is a command line utility to obtain scripts, files, whatever, from the internet. I'm going to use -o to define the file name, basic install.sh, followed by that's the name of the file we're going to be downloading, followed by the path or the address to the file, which is just install.pihole.net. Okay, so that's the first line, wget -o basic-install.sh followed by a space followed by https://install.pi-hole.net. When you press enter, it'll go ahead and download that script, that shell script. So all we need to do now is run that shell script. So I'm going to use sudo bash, because I'm going to run it using the bash shell, and then going to use basic-install.sh, which is the file, and press enter. This should now run that file, and it'll install PiHole for us. I like the graphic you get when it first loads up. Okay, so as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I already run PiHole on my Raspberry Pi, so it comes up with this screen first. You won't see this screen. So I'm going to go down to reconfigure just so that I can reset up PiHole and you can see the process that you will see on the screen. So I'll do that now. It takes a few seconds for the installation to go through, by the way, and along the way it'll ask you questions that you need to answer and configure. Okay, so this is where it starts. So there's a few screens to go through. This one is particularly important. It asks you to donate. I have donated. You should donate. If you use this, it's great to support the community which develops such wonderful technologies for us. You can donate as much as you like, of course. Going to keep going through this. Now it says here, the PiHole is a server, so it needs a static IP address. And we'll talk about that in a minute. It's referring to a local static IP address here. So we're going to be setting that on our router in a few minutes, but we don't have to worry about it at the moment. So we just keep going. Now it's saying choose an interface. For me, it's the Ethernet interface. So I'm going to click enter. My Pi 4 is connected to my router through the Ethernet connection. Okay, and now it's asking me for an upstream DNS provider. I always pick Cloudflare, maybe out of habit because I use Cloudflare. Doesn't really matter, just pick one. And then it's going to ask you for a what's called a third-party lists file. And this is a list of domains which are to be blocked and to be picked up. Currently, with my version, the one I've installed of PiHole, I have one option. So I'll just press enter to that. Select the protocols. Again, that's fine. Press enter. IPv4 and IPv6, that's fine. And then we get to this page. Do you want to use your current network settings as a static address? The answer is yes. Now this is my local IP address for my Raspberry Pi. I know this off by heart, I know it is. 192.168.112. Okay, now in a few minutes we're going to go to the router and make that static, the local IP static for this device, my Pi. But this is correct for me, and this will be your IP for your Raspberry Pi for you as well, your local IP. So there's nothing to be done here, you just press yes because that is true. Okay, it's just warning you now that you might get an IP conflict if you don't set an IP to be static for your device, but that's fine because we're going to set the IP static in just a minute. Okay, we're just going to keep going through here. It says, do you wish to install the web admin interface? Absolutely you do, that's incredibly important, it's a fantastic tool, so yes. Do you wish to install the web server? You do need to do that if you want the web interface. So PiHole installs this very, very light web server, light TPD, which it uses to host the web admin interface. So we have to say yes to that. Do you want to log queries? Yes. Now we get to this bit, and this is quite important. Now for me, I have nothing to hide, so I'm happy to show everything on the dashboard, but some people might not wish to show everything. Don't forget, and this is very important, very, very important, you have at this point got what's known as, in some circles, router logging. It's what companies do sometimes if they want to track your activities on the internet. At the router level, you can't really hide your activities. The websites that are being requested, the IP addresses, they are going through your router and they're being logged at router level. And this piece of software, PiHole, is basically intercepting those requests. So if you show everything, you're basically logging and making available to anybody who can access your PiHole, which will just be you or anybody you give access to it. We'll be able to give them access to basically your entire history of activity. For me, that's fine. I like it. I'm the only person anyway who has access to this, so that's fine. But if you don't want to, you could select something that's a bit more private. But for me, I'm the only person who has the password for it anyway, and I want to see everything, so show everything. So it'll go through the installation process now and finish off what it needs to install. And I think I will get one more pop up in a few minutes, which will just be giving me a little bit of information. So I'll just wait. There we go. Now your screen here is going to look a little bit different. It'll still show you your addresses, your IPv4 and IPv6 addresses here. It'll tell you how to connect to the web interface, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And it'll tell you your password. Now again, because I already run PiHole, it's just telling me that the password is unchanged. Okay, so click enter and we are done. So with that done, PiHole is installed on the Raspberry Pi, but actually we still have 3 things left to do. Now, before we do them, make sure you restart your Pi as suggested by the PiHole installation process. I might have skipped through that just then, but it did recommend to restart your Pi after you've done it. I don't need to, but you will have to. So make sure you restart your Raspberry Pi. Okay, so assuming you have just reset your Raspberry Pi, let's get on with the first of the 3 things we need to do to get PiHole running for us properly. The first thing is, if you're running a web server, like I am, on your Raspberry Pi, you won't be able to use the default port 80, which PiHole wants to use for its web interface. So we're going to need to change the default port that PiHole wants to use away from 80 to something else. Now, if you're thinking, well, that's okay, I'm not hosting anything on the Pi, so I don't need port 80. That is true, you don't need to do this step, but I do suggest you do still. And this is because basically, it's a Raspberry Pi, it's a hobbyist project, and you're probably at some point going to use port 80 for something else. So to avoid conflict and confusion in the future, I do still recommend you change the port. So to do that, I'm going to use the Nano text editor, as I normally do in my video series. It's very convenient, it's sudo nano to use the text editor, and then we're going to go to the configuration file for the very lightweight web server that's going to be hosting the web interface. So it's located at /etc/lighttpd/lighttpd.conf. So this is the path to the configuration file. So when I press enter, it'll show us the configuration. So we're just going to scroll down a little bit until we get to server port here, and I'm going to change 80 to something else. You can choose what you want to change it as. I'm going to use 8080 like that, and I'm now going to save it with Control O, press enter. That means that the port will now be 8080. Now this won't be applied until we reset the server. So we reset the server that's running the web interface as follows: sudo service lighttpd space restart and press enter. Okay, so with that done, we are able to move on to the second point that we should do in order to get this working. And that is, excuse me, we need to get a static local IP for the Raspberry Pi that we're hosting PiHole on, as recommended during the PiHole installation process. Now, this is done on your router, so that your router doesn't reassign the IP for your Pi to another local device. Otherwise, PiHole wouldn't work anymore. There are many different routers in the world, so I can't show you how you do this on your router, but I'll show you how I do it on mine. You need to log into your router with your admin credentials via your router's web interface, which all routers have, and you need to visit what's likely called your advanced settings or advanced network settings for your devices, excuse me, and find your Pi, which of course will be connected to your router somehow. So let's just go over now to my router. Oh, I've been kicked out. I'll just log in. I did sign in and get this already, but I've been kicked out, so I'm going to have to log back in. Sorry about that. Down here I've got manage my devices, and then I'm going to click on manage advanced settings in my case, and then I'm going to click on my Pi 4. Okay, so this is what the screen looks like for me. So in my case, I reserved the IP. There was a button here. It says cancel reservation, but I clicked it when it didn't say cancel reservation. It said reserve IP. And that means that this IP address for my Raspberry Pi locally on my router won't change. Now, in your case, you might have a different field. You might be able to type in the local IP address you want. But either way, so long as it's static, so long as it won't change, then you've basically achieved what PiHole needs. Okay, so finally, that's number 2 done. Let's move on to the last point, number 3, that we need to do. So despite doing what we've done so far, changing the port, installing PiHole, and setting the static IP, it still won't work. Your PiHole system won't be working. None of what we've done so far makes any difference unless we can point our devices connected to our local network to our Raspberry Pi hosting PiHole automatically for their internet connection. So if we can't do that, if we can't have all the devices going to the Pi for their internet connection, then it clearly won't work and no ads will be blocked. Now, this idea of going through the Raspberry Pi for internet connection for your local devices sounds very complex, but actually it isn't. It's basically very easy. We just need to change the DNS server settings on the router to point to the Raspberry Pi's local IP address, which we've just set as static. So if you head into the network settings on your router, for me it's called internet connectivity, and I'll show that in just a minute, you'll be able to change the DNS settings. So I'm going to do that. I know for a fact I'll have been kicked out of this window as well. So I'm going to see if I can go back and just ad-lib this a little bit. Does that home button work? No, back to dashboard. Okay. Just give me a moment to find what I'm after. I'm looking for internet settings, manage my internet settings, and then I'm going to be looking for internet connectivity in my case. Okay. So in here, I've selected manually specified DNS, whereas originally it was obtain DNS automatically. And as you can see, I've typed in the local IP address for my Raspberry Pi. So on your router, you need to do the same. You need to find your DNS settings, set it manual, and set it to be the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. Okay. So I've changed, as you can see here, both of my DNS1 and DNS2 options. You only have to actually change one of them and leave the other one blank if you like, but this router wouldn't let me do that, so I set them both to be the same. So this means all connected devices on my local network will visit my Raspberry Pi first for their internet connection needs, which of course is what we want. We want the Pi to be our gateway to the internet in order for PiHole to strip the ads out. So with that done, and saved of course, we now should have PiHole working for us, defending all of our devices on our local network from ads. Let's see what's going on by visiting the admin page. This is the bit where it gets exciting. So, visit the IP address for your Raspberry Pi. So for me, it's 192.168.1.12. Now if I press enter on here, I want to prove a point here, it says it can't reach the page. Okay? The reason is we've changed the port, and by default this IP is going to be going to port 80. Because it's a browser. So I'm going to change this to 8080. So I've got a colon after the IP address of my Pi, colon 8080, which is the port that we set in the settings. Okay? Press enter, and we've now got the PiHole logo on the screen. Now it rightly says, did you mean to go to the admin panel? Well, we did. So I could have clicked on that link, but I'm just going to add /admin. There we go. So if you type in your IP colon 8080 /admin, you should get to the dashboard. And it looks like this. Now you can log in and it'll give you more information. And you log in using the password that was given to you when we installed PiHole. Mine wasn't shown because it was already saved, but yours will have been shown and hopefully you took a copy of it. You can actually set the password at a later date as well. I suggest you Google that if you want to. But that's what I've got here. I'm not going to log in. I just wanted to show that it's working. And hopefully when you log into this URL, you'll see that these metrics are non-zero and PiHole is clearly working for you. It's quite interesting to see activities. For example, for me, you can see all internet activities ended at about 10:30 when my wife and I went to sleep. Then we're asleep until we wake up and probably check our phones, check the news, get up. I started my work here. I then had breakfast where the internet dropped off again. You can actually see my daily routine. And I've been working all morning and now it's lunchtime, so I'm using my lunch break to record this video. So anyway, hopefully that's everything you need and you've got it working. The very final check you need to do, and this sounds a bit obvious, but I thought I'd mention it, is just go on one of your devices connected to your local network, one of your devices basically connected to the internet, and just make sure that you can actually still connect to the internet. Almost certainly you can, but just have a check. Okay, so that's it. you are now protected against the most common advertisement-based domains. I hope you found this useful. If you have, please do like the video. It really helps, and please do subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos. If you'd like to receive support with me one-to-one, get access to scripts I've written, or just support my channel, please also do check out my Patreon account. Okay, good luck with this. It's a great tool to have working on your local network, and I will see you in the next video.